So today we're going to begin Unit 4.2, and we're actually going to start by talking about disease agents and natural selection. So we'll be on page 85 of our handbook today. So when we're thinking about disease agents, we're thinking of things that can cause illnesses. And disease can actually act as what we know as a selecting force. A selecting force is a situation that's going to allow one organism to survive better at a particular time. So a disease, or even something like a predator, or even the weather, the environment, could be selecting forces. It can allow a very specific phenotype to survive, someone that has a resistance to the disease or some sort of adaptation to the disease. So a selecting force is something that can usually cause some sort of death. Because if you die, you cannot pass on your genes. You cannot pass on your DNA. And so when we talk about disease, the first thing that we have to talk about are pathogens. And pathogens are anything that causes disease. That can be something like a virus or a bacteria, which we know about. Viruses cause the common cold, the flu, and bacteria can cause things like strep throat, okay? Or even like rashes and irritations. We have protists, one of those kingdoms that we've mentioned before at the beginning of the year, such as algae and protozoa that can cause disease, and also some fungus, some yeast, black mold. These are all things that can cause illnesses or disease. But when a pathogen invades your body, it's going to trigger what's known as an immune response. And an immune response is just your body's way of fighting that disease to prevent you from getting sick or preventing your illness from getting worse. So the immune system is going to produce what's known as antibodies to help fight that disease. And it is important for you to know that an antibody is a special type of protein, one of those functions of proteins, that fight disease. And there's many, many different types of antibodies. Antibodies that signal that there's some sort of virus or bacteria or mold in your system. And then there's other antibodies that actually go and try to destroy or try to fight those different types of pathogens. Okay? But when your body is trying to fight off disease, there are two types of immunity, or two ways in which you can become resistant to the disease, or to try to get rid of that disease. So make sure you also write down what's up there as well. So with passive immunity, there's two types of immunity, passive and active. And with passive, this really means that you are getting those antibodies, those proteins to fight disease, from another source. And with passive immunity, you could be getting, or that source could be from your mother. When you are first born, you don't really have an immune system that's developed. That takes time, that takes experience, that takes exposure to different diseases. And so the first antibodies you get are actually passively, and those come from your mom through the placenta while you're still in the womb, and also through breast milk. So that's why a lot of people support mothers feeding their babies breast milk. And another way in which you can get active immunity or passive immunity after you're already born is through something like an anti-venom, okay? An anti-venom is going to be a serum that contains antibodies. And so that's something that scientists can create. So notice in this picture that it says it's dividing our active immunity and our passive immunity, and it's telling you that the top two are naturally acquired immunities, how your body can naturally get this, or there's ways to artificially get that immunity as well. So for passive immunity, getting it through breast milk, through the placenta, is a natural way to get that type of immunity. But getting through a serum or an anti-venom is going to be artificial. Okay, it's a lab-created way, the way the doctor can give it to you. Then with active immunity, this means that your immune system is going to actively produce its own antibodies. You are going to make your own antibodies. So you could develop some sort of disease like the mumps, okay, or the chicken pox. And once you get the chicken pox, your body, you'll probably get sick for a little while, but your body does start to build up antibodies, getting used to that antigen, that pathogen, and eventually be able to learn how to fight it off and get rid of it. So the next time your body encounters something like the chicken pox, which is a virus, you'll actually remember that foreign invader, that pathogen, okay, and be able to fight it off the next time so you don't get sick at all, or you get sick for a very short amount of time. So that's the natural way to acquire active immunity. The artificial way would be through vaccines. And a vaccine is a weakened or dead virus that's injected into the body, and this is going to trigger that immune response. So you're basically tricking your body. You're giving the body a little bit of that virus that normally would make you sick, and then you're going to allow your body to try to fight off something that is dead or weak. And so you have a very high chance of getting rid of that. So think about how that relates to our flu vaccinations, okay? What are they really giving us? Well, they're actually giving us some sorts of strands of the virus. And that's why some people get really sick from the flu vaccine, because they're not always dead. Sometimes they're only weakened. And so you can still get sick from it, but the idea is that it teaches your body how to make antibodies that are specific, proteins that are specific to fight off that disease. So the next little section is actually talking about AIDS and natural selection. What you really need to know, first of all, is the difference between AIDS and HIV. AIDS, which stands for Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, is contracted through HIV. HIV is the human immunodeficiency virus. So basically, in order to get AIDS, you first have to get HIV. HIV is the virus. The virus is what's going to make you sick. That's the pathogen that causes disease. After that, this virus can cause your body to get sick, to get worse and worse and worse, and then you would develop AIDS. So HIV, the virus, causes AIDS. So that's why a lot of people can live for a very long time with HIV, and they would have to take a lot of medications. But the medications are basically trying to prevent the body from getting so bad that it turns into AIDS, which is a syndrome, okay? And that's usually when people's life expectancy changes and decreases significantly. But when we're talking about a virus, and we're using AIDS and HIV, the virus, as our example, a virus has just two main parts to it. The virus has an outer structure called a capsid, okay? So it's almost like the body of the virus. So if you imagine this black picture, the back outside, as the capsid made of protein. And then inside it'll have either some DNA that's double-stranded, or RNA, like in this picture, that's single-stranded. A virus is considered to be non-living. It's smaller than bacteria. Viruses are actually so small that they can actually infect bacteria, which are also really, really small. But a virus has to invade a different cell in order to survive. So this kind of goes back to Sternger, all those life characteristics. A virus cannot survive on its own. It cannot do all of those Sternger functions. So therefore, it's not considered living. But with the HIV virus specifically, the HIV virus actually attacks your T cells first. The T cells are a specific type of antibody that actually sends out the signal that tells your body that your body's under attack and now we need to fight this off. So basically, another way to think of this is that the HIV virus turns off the alarm, okay? The body's natural alarm system. And if you turn off the alarm, then the rest of the body isn't aware that it's under attack. And so that's when you start getting really sick. But one interesting thing to know, and in our notes, the last bullet on page 85 says 10% of European population is immune to HIV. I would actually like you to move that to the next page. So at the top of page 86, if you'll recopy this so it's in the right section. But really interesting to know is that 10% of Europeans are immune to HIV, which means even if they get exposed to the virus, to the HIV virus, they won't necessarily, or 10% of those people won't get sick. They'll get exposed to it, but it doesn't affect them, okay? The reason for this is that for some people, there was this random mutation, and here's the name and number of that mutation, that was selected for by the devastating Black Plague. So in history class, you learned about the Black Plague, and it actually allowed people, certain people with this mutation, to survive. So what we're really saying is that people with ancestors that survived the Black Plague didn't get infected because of this mutation. Now their future generations are actually immune to the HIV virus because of this mutation. So it's really, really rare. Now, people who inherit 2 copies of the same mutation are immune to HIV, okay? 2 copies. That's going back to the homozygous or heterozygous. So we're saying people that, again, were immune to the Black Plague, they passed on their genes, and if their child or grandchildren or great-great-great-grandchildren got 2 copies of the same mutation, then they would never get sick from HIV. So a lot of scientists are trying to figure out what could we do to try to manipulate that so that people no longer get infected with HIV. This image right here is talking about different ways in which we can actually prevent a virus from infecting people. When we talk about medicines that help prevent viruses from attacking, there's actually 3 different types, 3 general different types. There's, first of all, what's known as an antiviral block. This is actually going to prevent the virus from being able to attach to the cell. There's also an antiviral that interferes with the assembly of virus. When it goes into your body, it starts building its parts, its capsid and its DNA or RNA. So if it's already in your body, there's another type of medication that can prevent it from building or reproducing. And then there's also another antiviral that actually just affects replication, prevents the virus from being able to copy its DNA or RNA. So right here you'll want to pause for a minute and make sure that you have enough time to write down the different functions, the 3 different functions of antivirals. Again, blocking that viral DNA, interfering with the material being spliced or copied, and interfering with the assembly of the new viruses. And we'll talk about this a little more in class as well. So make sure you take a second to pause and copy down this information. The next thing that we want to look at is that viruses do mutate at a blinding pace. And so here, this is explaining why are there so many different medications for diseases like HIV? Well, it's because of those mutations, and those mutations allow the organism to survive. And so in the next 3 slides, including this one, we're really talking about because the mutation occurs, it allows the virus or allows the pathogen to survive. And when it survives, it's going to be able to pass on its DNA to its future generations. So make sure you pause in the next 2 slides and take time to copy it down, and we'll talk about it more in class. But here's information about the viruses. Here we're talking about antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Okay, you'll need to know what do antibiotics do that actually allow them to get rid of the bacteria in our body. So make sure you pause and take some time to copy this down. And the last slide is going to be on pesticide resistance. So we're talking about pest insects and what happens with them, what type of mutations occur that allow them to survive. So again, pause and make sure you finish copying this down. And that'll be all for today's video.